Alright guys, and welcome to my class picking guide for Classic Wrath of the Lich King. So my class picking guide is going to be a bit different to everyone else's class picking guide. I'm going to be very straight to the point and give you a good, fast, short and sweet TLDR for every single class and spec, covering the most important topics, let's be honest, that you care about. Is the class any good in PvE? Is it any good in PvP? And then lastly we'll finish with some class quirks and unique selling points. By the way guys, if you're looking to level up a new character in preparation for Wrath of the Lich King, or you're looking for a leveling guide in the future for Wrath of the Lich King, I definitely recommend checking over the guides over at restspeed.com. These guides are made by the best speed leveling, world record holding guys in the game. And if you're also looking to make some serious gold in Wrath of the Lich King, I definitely recommend checking out Solheim's Gold Making Guide. You'll find all the information to that in the description down below. And if you're looking for more detailed class videos, I will leave a playlist to all of those videos in the description down below because I'm slowly getting through them class by class too. But anyway, enough jibber jabbing, let's crack on with the video, starting with the Warlock. So the tables have turned with the Warlock. Now Affliction and Demonology are the top dog DPS specs in a raiding environment. Destro it's decent, but realistically it is just a worse version of a Demonology or Affliction Warlock, but it does provide the replenishment buff if your raid doesn't already have it, you know, from a Ret Paladin or something like that. Both are great at single target and AoE DPS, although the Demonology Warlock definitely is the stronger candidate for AoE DPS. They're really just slightly behind the Mage. Their DPS is stronger during the Execuse phase dramatically, so in longer fights they will creep up on the logs. Also, it's very good to hear that the Warlock is a proper pet class now. The play is to always have your pet out. In PvP, we get this great new spell called Demonic Circle Teleport, where you place it on the ground and then you can teleport back up to that location. Affliction will always go for Unstable Affliction now. It's very overpowered because it silences the healer when they dispel it. Haunt can now also be used to increase all dot damage on the target. They're definitely not as tanky in PvP though, because they can't Soul Link and Siphon Life. All specs across the board, apart from the prot ret spec, will spec deeper into their trees. Not really that much hybridization in Wrath of the Lich King. An Affliction Warlock goes very well in the MLD comp, which is Mage Lock Druid, Shadow Play, which is with a Shadow Priest healer, and then Shadow Cleave, which is an Holy Death Knight healer. Destruction is also very good in the arena, but it's limited to comps that have a lot of control, otherwise the Destruction Warlock just isn't going to be able to get those Chaos Bolts off. It's going to be hard countered by a melee comp, for instance. So most people like to play LSD when it plays Destruction. Then Demonology is just worse than the other specs. It relies on Metamorphosis to do a lot of damage, but then without it, you're just more of a noodle version of Affliction or Destruction. The quirks of the Warlock, all the great stuff like Summoning, Health Stones, you got your new Teleport spell, Enslave Demon, you got an AoE Fear, you got the Inferno, the Doom Guard, you got Shadow Fury, which has been buffed to also have a slow when it's glyph now. You have your own weapon oils with Firestone and Spellstone, and you also have Soulstone to self-resurrect yourself or one of your allies. Now, one of the big elephants in the room is the Warrior. The simple truth of a Warrior is it's the exact same story with the Burning Crusade. They just scale to become better as the expansion goes on. Once they get a good amount of crit and armor penetration, they will start to pump in Ulduar, and then by ICC they are one of the top DPS, if not the best possible DPS possible, when they finally do get Shadowmourne. But early on, in Phase 1, they will excel on those cheeky cleave fights. As a tank, you are considered the weakest tank now in this expansion, but you can definitely clear over content, no problem. It's just that the other tanks got a huge power spike in Wrath of the Lich King. You also don't have to worry about AoE DPS pulling aggro off you in dungeons anymore, because you just have better AoE abilities and better AoE threats. You can also apply arms if you want. You provide that great Blood Frenzy buff still, which will complement a physical damage heavy setup. Now in PvP, the top dog spec is definitely arms. You have that Mortal Strike, which reduces the healing of a target by 50%. Fury really is just a arms warrior with less pressure and less utility. They get a lot of needed changes jumping into Wrath. First of all, you have much better stance dancing since Tactical Mastery has been moved to the top of the Fury tree rather than the Protection tree. For example, you can easily bump over the defensive stance for a cheeky Spell Reflect, even more healing reduction with the Unrelenting Assault talent if you're, overpower the target while they are casting. So basically, if you overpower a target while they're casting, obviously a healer, then yeah, the next heal is just going to be absolute pants. This is also the Age of Bladestorm. It's great for cleaving the enemy arena team and just destroying people in battlegrounds. They pair well with a very high DPS. For instance, Thundercleave, which is going to be with an Enhancement Shaman, or TSG. This is the golden age of TSG, Death Knight, and Arms Warrior with a healer, normally a Holy Paladin, just deleting healers from the game. I mean, people will quite literally delete their characters if they're playing a healer in Wrath of the Lich King and go against TSG a little too many times. Now for the quirks, in the Fury Tree you can now equip two-handed weapons, which is always really cool. You got things like Disarm, you got Shattering Throw now, which can break ice blocks. You've got Shockwave, the big juicy AoE stun and protection tree. You got Spell Reflection. You can charge in combat now. You've also got abilities like Intervene, Ranged Pull with Heroic Throw. You no longer have to use your gun all the time. You've always got your strong defensive cooldowns like Shield Wall and Last Stand. You've got an AoE Slow Piercing Hell, and you've also got Vigilance, which is a little ability in a protection tree that transfers threat and refreshes taunt whenever that target is taking damage. And now for the Hunter, this is a top tier DPS, but the tables have turned again. This time round, the top dog specs are Survival and Marksman. Marksman is similar to a Warrior. It needs that armor penetration before it really starts to pump, but you can make Survival pump early on in Wrath of the Lich King very easily. You just got to melee weave to put your traps down on the target, because what this will do is it will proc that lock and load effect that causes periodic damage of your Immolation trap to make your explosive shot trigger absolutely no cooldowns. It's like a free explosive shot, and you can do that every 22 seconds. Unfortunately, Beast Mastery becomes really, really cool in Wrath. You can, tame things like Devil Souls, but it's just a leveling spec. Not going to lie, the DPS just isn't that great. It's an absolute shame because it's one of the coolest specs in the game, but yeah, really is just a solo farming or leveling spec now. Now in PvP, most people are going to play Marksman. Beast Mastery works well with Beast Cleave, which is a comp with an Enhancement Shaman. It just has less utility than Marksman, but it may be good really early on in Wrath when people are low resilience geared, because the burst is pretty insane. You can play Survival if you want, but again, it's just a worse version of Marksman because it has less burst and less utility. Getting traps up is really easy now with the ability Freezing Arrow, which will just shoot your trap onto a location where you want it. It's when the Scatter Trap combo comes into play. So it's much easier to get traps up. You can also play 3 traps at once. You've got Disengage, which has been buffed. This is when Disengage will actually leap you backwards. Aim Shot also isn't casted anymore, it's just an instant ability. It's very OP because it's basically a mortal strike. You've also got Master's Call, which is a 4-second freedom that the pet actually can cast on your allies, so you can cast it while you're CC'd. You've got Readiness, which refreshes all of your Hunter cooldowns. You've got Chimera Shot, which can also disarm. Pet can intervene. And the comps for Hunter really goes well with is Jungle Cleave, which is with a Feral and a healer. You've also got Cupid Cleave, which is with a Hunter and a Retribution Paladin. And then you can also, if you're going to play Survival, go with an Affliction Warlock, to have that double dot combo going. And now for the quirks, obviously you're always faster with your Aspect of the Cheetah and Aspect of the Pack. You can call a stabled pet every 5 minutes now, which is cool. You don't have to always go back to your stable. And you've also got Silencing Shot. Now let's cover the Paladin. It's the exact same story as the Warrior, if I'm going to be honest. They scale when they get better gear, and they are good on the cleave fights early on. They actually have really, really good natural cleave, because a lot of their single target abilities are also AoE abilities, and they just have to change one of their seals for their abilities to start cleaving, which is really nice. What gives them a really good power spike though is the Ice Crown Citadel 2-set bonus. That's a 40% chance to reset the cooldown of Divine Storm, which is one of your hardest hitting abilities. As a tank, you are considered the best tank of the expansion. Insane survivability, insane AoE threat and damage. And now you have a defensive cooldown, Divine Protection. You also have a very powerful raid cooldown, Divine Protection, which reduces the damage on the entire raid. You also have Aura Mastery, making the raid immune to silence effects. As a healer, they're also very strong. You now finally have some AoE healing with this Holy Light glyph. You can heal 2 targets at once with Beacon of Light, which also makes them extremely mana efficient. And you can also go into melee range to get your mana back, with your Seal of Wisdom. When it comes to PvP, Retribution is a mid to top tier spec. They have really good burst damage with lots of support like Freedom, Dispels, 2 sacrifices now. They can also do instant off heals with their Art of War procs. You've got Blessing Protection, their Replenishment talent, which is great because it helps out the healer. They're normally played comps like Cupid Cleave, which is Hunter and a Disc Priest and the Ret Paladin. You've got Vanguard's Cleave, which is when you play with an Unholy Death Knight, that's very strong. You can also play with a Warrior too, which is very nice because you give the Warrior freedom. Holy Paladin, absolute top tier, considered one of the best healers in Arena in Wrath of the Lich King. Mainly because of Beacon of Light. This is stupidly overpowered in PvP because you're just constantly healing 2 people at absolutely no extra mana cost. And Holy Shock crits can now turn into instant Flash of Lights. You also have really good reduction on spell pushback with your concentration aura, which can be increased with aura mastery. You are wearing full plate gear, which makes them much more tanky, and you've got good cooldowns like Divine Shield and Blessing Protection. They're normally paired in comps like TSG, Thundercleave, LSP. And one last thing to mention is there actually is another spec to play, which is the strongest support DPS class in the arena. It's actually been popularised by private servers. Not many people, well, to my knowledge, really played this in original Wrath. And it's called Preg Spec or Prot Ret, where you use a one-hander and a shield of a spell power weapon. You spec half into Ret and then half into Protection. It's only really strong very late game when you get lots and lots of crit gear, because obviously your crits will generate these Art of War procs, which provide loads and loads of instant flash heals. And you can also pack a punch as well, because obviously you can turn them into exorcisms if you need the damage. So when you're geared enough, you just have constant free flash of lights. So it's almost like having 2 healers in the game. And if you are going to get trained, you will have Reckoning to counter damage for quite a lot. This normally pairs well with a priest or an elemental shaman, or an arms warrior and a disc priest. Now let's talk about the quirks. You now finally have a single target taunt. Exorcism and Holy Wrath affect all targets, not just undead and demons, and you also have a new ability called Sacred Shield. Now let's talk about the best class in the game, which is obviously going to be the Death Knight. So both Unholy and Frost are top tier specs, day 1 to the end of the entirety of Wrath of the Lich King. The greatest single target damage and AoE, although Unholy is the absolute king of AoE in Wrath of the Lich King, arguably the best AoE DPS in the game. Early on they pump because they don't rely on gear, but then they also scale incredibly well with gear. Even Bloodspec can be played, but since most of its damage is melee, it needs a high amount of armor penetration like the Warrior to become powerful, but it surprisingly pumps quite a lot of decent damage because you have really good cooldowns in the Blood Tree, like Empower Rune Weapon and Hysteria, which is an ability that should never ever be casted on a feral druid and should only ever be casted on other fellow Death Knights. As a tank, they have the best self-healing in the game, which allows them to actually solo a lot of old raids. You're probably going to see a lot of that action on YouTube when Wrath does come out. We also have great defensive cooldowns like Icebound Fortitude, the best threat generation in the game with Icy Touch. They're just a top tier class across the board. It's to be expected really, they are the class of the expansion. Now in PvP they really are a force to be reckoned with. They've got great burst damage, a great cleave damage because they can spread over their dots like a warlock. They've got amazing peels of Chains of Ice. Chains of Ice is extremely overpowered in Wrath because it starts off as a 95% movement speed reduction and then slowly degrades. You've also obviously got Death Grip. Got great defensive cooldowns like I mentioned before, Icebound Fortitude, massive damage reduction, Death Pact just heals you 50% of your health, why not? And then Anti-Magic Shield which totally counters magic damage. We've also got Lichborn. It's the new Will of the Forsaken. Will of the Forsaken actually gets nerfed in Wrath, but then Death Knights get it for free. Can't complain at that. The only downside is you can be shackled or turn eviled during your Lichborn, which is fine because you can just set up a macro to remove it when they're casting it. Frost has Hungry and Cold, which is a great AoE freezing trap, basically, but Frost just simply has less utility and less survivability than Unholy, because Unholy, it has Anti-Magic Zone, has Bone Shield, has Desecration, which is like an AoE slowing effect on the ground. The Gargoyle is also just ludicrously overpowered in Wrath of the Lich King. The Gargoyle is so overpowered, it could probably just solo a player. It does that much damage. And obviously it's very hard to avoid that damage, because it's in the air, just constantly casting spells at you. Unless you can shackle it or turn evil it. Unholy goes well in a number of specs. TSG obviously, which is a warrior and healer like I mentioned before. You got Shadow Cleave with an Affliction Wall because that is just insane AoE pressure on the entire team. You basically, there's a ticking time bomb when you play against Shadow Cleave. Before that, raw damage is just going to drain the healer's mana and then they will just win. It can also go well with Ret Paladin as well. Blood in PvP is more of a meme spec to cheese winning 2v2 games against really bad players to get your arena points. Now for Death Knight quirks, you got Rune Forging, which means for life you have totally free enchants. You save a lot of money in that regard. You don't have to spend like thousands of gold on your berserk and enchant. You've got Water Walking, and you've also got a faster mount with a talent in the Unholy Tree. Now for the Mage, arguably the strongest range DPS in Wrath of the Lich King. Many speedrunners will stack them, I've seen it in footage before. It's a similar story to the Burning Crusade. You will play Arcane until you get insane crit gear, and then you'll swap to Fire. Frost is more of just a PvP and leveling spec. In the Fire spec, you also now get Living Bomb in Wrath of the Lich King, which makes it slightly more interesting because they will proc into some really dirty hot streak procs, which means instant pyroblasts. And even Arcane spec is a little bit more interesting since you can weave in Arcane missiles when you get missile barrage procs. Now in PvP, Arcane's just a bit of a meme. Most people are just going to play Frost. You now got Mirror Image, which is a great bursting ability. You got Frostfire, which applies a slow and a dot. You got Glyph of Polymorph, but what that's going to do is when you polymorph a target that has dots on it, well, it'll just remove those dots, so you can always get a polymorph off. Evocation also now regains health with a talent. Sorry, actually a glyph. Dragon's Breath has been buffed. It's now a 5-second disorientate effect. Blast Wave now actually has a knockback, so you can knock people off the platforms in the arena. Fire Spec also has a talent that makes you immune to silencing kicks for 20 seconds after, being affected by one. It goes well with comps like Affliction and a Boomkin, because again it's like 2 DPS classes that have 2 sets of dots. Deep in the Frost Tree we also get the ability Deep Freeze, which is a 5-second stun, and it doesn't break. And it also acts like that target is frozen, so it causes Shatter. For 5 seconds you can just pump into a target and get that shatter effect. You've also got Fingers of the Frost, which is a proc, which acts like the targets are frozen again, so you get those shatter procs. You've also got a new proccing effect called Brain Freeze, which is instant Frostfire bolts. So basically you don't have to rely as much on, getting Frost Novas off to do your big pumper shatter crits. There's loads of different ways that you can get those big juicy crits, which means more sustained and better pressure. The only downside to a mage is they're a little bit more squishy. So again, you don't want to get trained or anything like that. But anyway, the mage goes well with a rogue, mage priest, that's RMP. You've got mage lock shaman, MLS. And then you've also got Shatterplate, which is with a shadow priest and a healer. Probably a feral druid. Not feral druid, obviously a resto druid. Now the quirks of playing a mage, obviously you got portals, free food, you got invisibility, which is great at the start of an arena game, you got slow fall, and abilities like spell steal. And now for the shaman. So both elemental and enhancement are both great in PvE, but there's a little bit of a catch to the elemental spec. Basically, long story short, other classes get huge power spikes later on in Wrath of the Lich King, and early shaman, it just doesn't. It just kind of continues to steadily rise in power, whereas all the other classes just, they get injected with steroids, and the elemental shaman just doesn't. But they still provide great buffs that can kind of also be provided by other and better DPS. So long story short, the elemental shaman much less desirable in Wrath of the Lich King. They also get lava burst as well, that's important to mention. Enhancement of your hand, it's a strong pumper from start to finish, but be mindful, it has a fairly high skill ceiling, to be honest. You do actually have to be good at the game to pump high as an enhancement shaman. It's also important to note that you finally do get the cooldown Spirit Wolves, which is very cool. Resto Shaman finally gets Riptide and has the goodies that it all had in TBC, but it's very simply just falls behind the other healers on the meters, so you probably won't see many in raids unless a Bloodlust is needed and it's not being provided by an Ellie or an enhancement shaman. Now, in PvP, you can play both Enhancement and Elemental, but Elemental definitely is the top dog. Many people consider Elemental to be the best caster in the arena, or best range DPS. They finally get the ability Hex, which is like a polymorph. The player can still control it, but it's a curse, so only mages and druids and other shamans can remove it. And it has a very short cooldown in Wrath of only 45 seconds. You've also got abilities like Wind Shear, which is an insane interrupt because it's a ranged interrupt. You don't even have to be in range of the healer. You can kick the healer at the other side of the arena game. You've also got the great totems and utility like Grounding Totem. You've got Stoneclaw Totem, which now actually provides a bubble with a glyph. You've got Earthbind Totem, which with a talent will also root the target in place, so again it's great control. Enhancement also has Maelstrom Weapon for instant heals or lightning bolts. Purge, again, is always there. Purge can be one of the most OP abilities in Arena, Elemental just has insane burst damage now because of Lava Burst, and you can chain that into a Chain Lightning, and then Chain Lightning also has a 33% chance by default to deal its damage twice. So there's a little bit RNG involved, but yeah, Elemental can just spike out insane burst damage out of nowhere that the healer won't even expect. You combine that with a cheeky Chaos Bolt, the target is definitely dead. Enhancement mostly goes well with melee comps like a warrior, but Elemental can play, LSD, Lock, Shaman, Druid. Goes well with Destruction, like I mentioned before, because you combine their burst DPS and they have a lot of control to allow their casts to pop off. Resto's obviously been buffed with Riptide because it's an instant heal. We don't have to, hard cast it. Earth Shield is also harder to dispel because it has, when you dispel, purge a Resto Shaman, it will purge stacks of the Earth Shield rather than removing the whole thing off. And they can also remove curses now, which is really cool. They're likely to be paired with a Mage and a Warlock, so MLS, or Wind Fury Cleave, which is a Ret and a Warrior, because obviously that Wind Fury Totem is massively buffing a Ret and a Warrior, and it can also obviously do TSG. And now for the quirks, obviously you still got Bloodlust, and you can also use it in Arena, enjoy it while you can, because that is going in Cataclysm. You've got Cleanse Spirit, which removes curses. You've got your Cleansing Totems as always, which are really great. You now have Earth Living Weapon, which is a weapon immune that has a chance to give you a hot when you're striking with your melee weapon. Elemental now finally has Thunderstorm, so here come the days of knocking people off the map in Eye of a Storm. And you finally get that cheeky ability that can drop 4 of your totems at once, and you can have 3 different presets of the different totem sets that you want for different environments and different setups. Now for the Rogue, you'd be glad to hear that it's not the same story as the Burning Crusade. You are a top tier DPS start to finish, you just have to change your spec. So early on, Assassination is definitely stronger than Combat because Combat, it relies on armor penetration and crit. Also very, very easy to gear up an Assassination from Rogue because you can get your best in slot daggers from your auction house for just these crappy blue daggers. When you finally can play Combat, which is normally going to be in Old War, you can do really good cleave DPS now with abilities like Fan of Knives and Killing Spree, so you're no longer restricted to just being able to cleave with your Blade Fury cooldown. You've also got the new ability Tricks of a Trade, which was added in Wrath, which transfers threat and increases damage done by the target by 15% for 6 seconds. It's also important to know that energy now regenerates constantly instead of in ticks, or big chunks anyway. Now when it comes to PvP, simple cold hard truth is, you probably already know this though, Combat is just a worse version of a Subtlety Rogue, and Assassination is a less worse version of a Subtlety Rogue. Playstyle has totally changed. You no longer just stick on your target and spam Hemo, since your damage is way more bursty and spiky, so it requires you to master perfect CC chains and setups, with your blind, sap and million different stunning abilities that you have. What's cool is that you get extra crit when other party members will crit. You've also got this new OP ability called Shadow Dance that allows you to use stealthed abilities like Sap and everything like that while not actually in stealth. Along with Vanish and Prep, it means that you have better access to your juicy stealth abilities. It just makes Subtlety so much better than the other specs. The compositions you're likely going to go with is Rogue, Shadow Priest and Healer, and then you've got Scooby-Doo Cleave, which is a Rogue, Ret Paladin, and a Disc Priest. And obviously you can also go RMP, which is Rogue, Mage, and a Priest. Now for quirks, again you always have the quirks that you've always had as a Rogue, soloing dungeons, and pickpocketing, everything like that. You also have the great CC ability Disarm, which counters other melee DPS massively. Also, Feint now will reduce the AoE damage that you take, so it also kind of works like a pet's avoidance effect, which can be very nice. And now for the Druids. So Feral is an extremely strong DPS from start to finish because you can pump without armor penetration, but then also benefit massively from armor penetration. You also finally do get to do some cheeky cleave DPS. As a tank, you're the mid-tier tank. Not much has changed, honestly. You're still a very reliable meat shield. It's just that people love Death Knights and Paladin tanks that little bit more, but people aren't going to complain because, not many people play tank, so, if a Feral Druid tank turns up, it's happy days. As a balance, you are mainly a support DPS. You provide great buffs and debuffs, but your DPS will always be in the middle of the pack. However, on AoE fights, that really is your time to shine, because your AoE damage is absolute top tier because of Starfall and Hurricane. Now, the main thing that stands out about a Resto Druid is the little ability called Revitalize. Your Rejuvenation Wild Growth have a small chance to regain energy, rage, mana, and runic power per tick, so this can increase a tank's aggro, boost DPS. Other than that, they are just an absolute solid healer as always. What's nice about this new Wild Growth ability is you can like stack it up before AoE damage comes in, and then when AoE damage comes in, everyone already has a little bit of a cheeky hot, gonna top them up. Feral's also very good in PvP. Now, finishing moves make your nature spells an instant cast for instant clones, instant heals, all that good stuff. Berserk also makes them totally immune to fear, and will actually break fear if you're already in a fear. You've also got Survival Instinct, 30% health boost, great defensive cooldown, but Feral Druid is still a little bit squishy, that's the only issue. They're not incredibly squishy like a mage, but just a little bit squishy. They normally go in comps like Jungle Cleave, which is with a hunter, or Kitty Cleave, which is with an arms warrior. Now, balance is still limited by the fact that it's a massive hard caster. You will get trained, and then you won't be able to do that much pressure, but at least they're not as squishy because, you know, there's a lot of armor in Moonkin form. You've also got abilities like Typhoon to knock people back and provide peels. People playing Boomkin are probably going to play with a Fire Mage in the Spicy Chicken Cleave, which is probably the coolest sounding arena comp name of all time. May also play LSD2, which is an Affliction, Boomkin, and Resto Shaman. And this comp is really good for the same reason Shadow Cleave is good. There's a ticking time bomb ticking when that arena starts. If the Boomkin and the Affliction wallet get all their dots up, it's only a matter of time before the other healer is going to run out of mana and the enemy team will just slowly die. Resto also gets some decent buffs. You've now got an instant AoE healing over time effect while growth. You've got Nourish, which is a much shorter burst heal, so it's easier to, you know, get off when you're being trained. You've got Glyph for Swiftmend, which prevents the Swiftmend ability from removing regrowth or rejuvenation, so you can just spam that to your heart's content without it removing your hots. They're also just generally really good at escaping and continuing to heal during line of sight. They were likely playing comps like MDL, which is Mage Lock Druid, or LSD like I mentioned before. When it comes to quirks, again you get everything that you did in TBC. The only changes here really are Nature's Grass now has free charges, which is really nice, and obviously you can always take advantage of all the great different Druid forms. And that means you always have access to stealth, and you always have access to a fast water moving form. And lastly, but definitely not least, we have the Priest. So the new top dog spec is the Disc Priest. Power Word Shield has been drastically buffed in Wrath. It's extremely mana efficient, with talents like Rapture that return 2.5% of your mana, but also grant the target resource regeneration like the Druid's Revitalize. Holy is still good, with its, you know, cheap AoE healing with Circular Healing, and you get out jail free card with Guardian Spirit, which is a new ability which is very nice. You can make the tank totally cheat death. Shadow is still a mid-pack utility and support spec, but at least as the expansion goes on, they don't get worse and worse and worse to just being like slightly above the tanks on the DPS meters. They also get a new AoE ability called Mindshear in Wrath of Lich King, so they no longer just have to like spread their dots on AoE fights and then do absolute noodle DPS. They can do Mindshear, but the issue with Mindshear is it won't actually deal damage to the target that you're Mindshearing, so you really need big packs for that ability to pump. There's also a lot of situations where the AoE healing of a priest is very, very good. And obviously on your longer fights, Vampiric Touch is also great at regenerating mana to the rest of the raid. In PvP, when you're playing Disc, you've got a new ability called Divine Hymn, which can heal through pillars, which is great. So you can, you know, get some cheeky heals off without actually being in risk. The ability Rapture is very overpowered in PvP, 3% damage reduction on Power Word Shield targets. Crit heals also provide an extra cheeky bubble, and after casting your Power Word Shield, it reduces the cast time on your abilities, so it's just much easier to get your heals off. You also got Penance as well, which obviously heals a target through LOS as well, and it also just packs a punch. Shadow Spec, still great. Pain and Suffering reduces the damage you take from Shadow Word Death, so it's less risky to use Shadow Word Death. You can also refresh your Shadow Word Pain on the target. You've got a new CC ability called Psychic Horror. It's like a Horrify effect, but it can also be used as a 10-second cheeky disarm. Dispersion is your new strong defensive ability. It can be used in all forms of crowd control to break them. The only issue with a Shadow Priest is they do have big ramp up time, like you need to get your dots up, you need to get your Vampiric Embrace up and everything like that, and if you don't do that, then you're bang in trouble. So it gets countered hard by those really harsh, bursty comps like TSG. But it goes very well in comps like RPD, which is Rogue, Shadow Priest and Druid, and then obviously Shatterplay when you play with a Mage. It's also important to note that this Priest does go well with a number of comps. Now for the quirks, you obviously always have Fear Ward, you got your Hymn of Hope, which is mana regeneration for the whole party, you got Master Spell, which can break ice blocks and Divine Shields, and you've also got Power Infusion, which can boost the DPS of a friendly target, or friendly caster. And that, guys, is going to be the end of the video there. My voice box is about to explode after recording such a long video. But anyway, my name is MetaGoblin. To my next video, ciao.